Hi again, everybody. Here's an interesting game that was played in Bordeaux in 1915 with Gaudin with the white pieces and Guérinot with the black, and it's a Caro Kann defense. And it starts out E4, C6, D4, D5, Knight C3, and now black takes off the E-pawn, and white recaptures with a knight. And now black brings his bishop out to F5, hitting at the knight. So white retreats the knight to G3 and hits at the bishop. So black retreats the bishop back to G6. And now white brings out his other knight to F3. Black plays the E-pawn up to let the bishop out. And now white plays his H-pawn up to H4, threatening, of course, to hit at the bishop at G6, so that the bishop has to move forward and white can exchange it off the board. But black decides he wants to keep that bishop, so he plays his H-pawn up to H6 to give the bishop an escape square. And sure enough, on the next move, white plays his knight from F3 up to E5, hitting at the bishop, so black retreats the bishop back to H7. White now brings out his king bishop to E2, and black brings his knight from B8 to D7. And now white reinforces that knight he has up at E5 by bringing his bishop up to F4. And now black brings out his other knight to F6. White now takes his bishop at E2 and moves it up to F3. And now black takes his knight from F6 and moves it to D5, threatening, of course, the bishop at F4. So white goes ahead and just captures the knight at D5. And black recaptures with his E-pawn. And now that the E-file is pretty much open, white plays his queen up to E2, obviously threatening a discovered check on the black king, so black blocks that idea by moving his own queen to E7. And now white castles kingside, and black castles queenside. And believe it or not, it's now time for the challenge to the viewer. If you'd like to pause the video now and see if you can find white's next move, I'll wait for you. Well, believe it or not, by castling queenside, black has lost the game, because white now plays knight takes the pawn on C6. And at this point, black realizes that if he captures that knight with his B-pawn, then white simply plays his queen to A6, checkmate. A nice little crisscross checkmate with the queen and the bishop back at F4. So, if we go back, and instead black decides to capture white's queen at E2, then, believe it or not, all white has to do is play knight takes the pawn at A7, and that is also checkmate, thanks again to the help from the bishop sitting on F4. The only way black can actually stop the checkmate is to give his king an escape square, and the only way he can do that is to play his knight to B6. And now, of course, if white would attempt to take the pawn at A7, the king can now escape to D7. But of course, by moving his knight to B6, he has, of course, had to give up his queen to stop the checkmate, and all white has to do is just play knight takes E7 check, and the game's essentially over anyway. Well, anyway, I just thought that was a pretty interesting game, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.